Hi everyone, in this video we'll be talking about epithelial tissue, and we'll start off by describing the basic characteristics of epithelia. So generally we're talking about cells that are bound very closely together. It's not to say that there's never gaps in between, but generally they're pretty tightly packed in. The cells possess a property called polarity, which basically means that we differentiate an exposed surface versus an attached surface. So we'll just sort of draw in here a point of attachment. We're going to draw the epithelia a little bit more clearly. In this case, we'll show the epithelia sort of surrounding a lumen. And we can see the apical surface is exposed. So exposed to the lumen, exposed to the surface. And then we have the basal, which is sort of like the bottom of the cell, connected to another surface. And we have the lateral aspects of the cells, which basically are the sides of the cell that connect to the other cells. And together we can often refer to the attached surfaces as basolateral. So we separate the apical from the basolateral. So sometimes you'll see basal and sometimes you'll see basolateral, and the distinction is kind of minor. Now also the blue line is the basal lamina, and then we'll draw in a purple line, and that is going to be the reticular lamina. And together those make up the basement membrane. We'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. Typically the exposed surface will contain either cilia or microvilli. And so in this case we'll draw in some cilia. And often the cells themselves are avascular, meaning that they don't have direct access to a blood supply. So they have to get their nutrients either from the exposed surface or the attached surface. So if we have oxygen traveling through this lumen, we can see that it will diffuse right into the cell. So it's not coming from the blood, it's just coming sort of direct. And then the last characteristic that is really common to epithelial cells is that they possess a lot of stem cells. Stem cells are undifferentiated cells, meaning that they are not yet specialized for a particular function. So specialized cells will lose some of their organelles if they're not needed, or they'll only make certain proteins. They're made to do a specific job, but undifferentiated cells possess all the characteristics so that they could become any cell. And this is important because epithelia actually regenerates very frequently due to regular exposure to harsh conditions. All right, so let's go back and talk about the basal lamina for a moment. So the basal lamina is made of some sort of like protein structures, or protein carbohydrate composite structures called proteoglycans, glycoproteins, collagen, and laminin. So I know these words are kind of crazy, but basically just think of them as either protein or protein plus carbohydrate sort of together. And they are products that are synthesized and secreted by the epithelial cells. So the cells actually make the products and then they secrete them sort of through the basal surface in order to become the basal lamina. So the basal lamina basically functions as a barrier. It restricts the movement of proteins and large molecules from tissues that are below or deeper. So we know that the apical surface of the epithelia is going to be touching something that is technically sort of outside of the body. So like the inside of the GI tract, or maybe the inside of the respiratory tract, or even the skin, but deeper than the tissues, so deeper than the basal surface, we have to have other types of tissues that are present. And we're going to sort of get into what other tissues might be there and why they're there. But basically we could just sort of think of, so the barrier, because it's made of these protein carbohydrate composites, the basal lamina possesses a lot of negative charge, and we know that proteins possess negative charge as well. And so it sort of creates some repulsion, so that these proteins can't emerge and then become part of the epithelial space instead. Now below the basal lamina we drew a purple line, and we said that was the reticular lamina. The reticular lamina is technically part of connective tissue, so we'll sort of address that a little bit more when we describe connective tissue, but together oftentimes we refer to the basal lamina and the reticular lamina as the basement membrane. So I really only mention the reticular lamina to point out that basal lamina and basement membrane are not technically equivalent. So we can break down epithelia into some different types. The first type would be simple. Simple refers to a single layer of cells. So just one layer, we have simple epithelium. We can also have stratified epithelia, and when we have stratified, it means we have multiple layers of cells, and they're just sort of stacked on top of each other. And then finally, we can have pseudo-stratified epithelia, which basically means that it's really one layer, but it looks like many layers, and so it's sort of like pretend stratified, pseudo-stratified. We can also have different shapes of epithelia. So first we have squamous. Squamous basically refers to flat cells. So you have to remember the cell is a three-dimensional structure, but squamous cells are particularly flat. We also have cuboidal, which take a cube shape, and columnar, which takes sort of a column shape. Then we also can have transitional epithelium, and this basically means that the shape can change to accommodate things like stretch. So transitional epithelium, for example, would be found in the bladder. So as the bladder fills with urine over the course of some time of drinking water and such, the bladder will stretch out to accommodate the new fluid that's contained within it, and the cells actually sort of change their shape in order to accommodate this function. When we think about naming a particular type of epithelial tissue, we use actually a type and a shape to describe it. So we could say simple cuboidal epithelium, or we could say pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. So we'll pick a word from the left and a word from the right and put them together. If we're looking at stratified epithelium, then we would actually name it according to whichever type of cell is on the top. So just because it's stratified doesn't mean it has to have all the same type of cell. So we could have some cuboidal cells towards the bottom and then squamous cells towards the top. So whichever layer is the very top layer is how we would describe it. So if we said stratified squamous epithelium, for example, we could actually have some cuboidal cells in the deeper layers. All right, that concludes our overview of epithelial tissue. Thanks for watching.